Life sometimes surprises us at unexpected moments. What opens as an ordinary instant can swiftly turn extraordinary. However, this is one of those moments. Jake Thompson had loved his weekend hikes through the dense woods near his hometown. Nature was his escape, the antidote to the cacophony of daily life. But this Saturday had a different feel. As Jake ventured further into the woods, the mild rustle of leaves and distant song of birds were disrupted by a faint whimper. He froze, listening hard. A soft, desperate sound came again. Jake was worried, though, and he followed the sound off the trail, picking his way through the underbrush until he came to a fallen oak tree. Crouched in the hollow of its trunk was a small, shivering creature. At first, it appeared to be a puppy, small, fragile, with dirty brown and black fur. Its body quivered, and its shallow breathing was soft. Jake's heart clenched. "Hey there, little one," he murmured gently, crouching down. "You're safe now." Gingerly, Jake unzipped his jacket and enwrapped the creature in it, cradling it against his torso. He felt the subtle, thudding heartbeat against his arms. Without thinking, Jake rushed to his truck, cranked the heat, and laid the bundled creature on the passenger seat. His mind raced. Who would leave a pup abandoned out here? But something seemed off. Its limbs were a little too long, and up close its fur seemed different. Jake brushed off the thought. At this moment, saving it was all that could matter. He looked up the nearest veterinary clinic and found one just a few miles away. Cedar Grove Emergency Animal Clinic. "Hold on, buddy," Jake whispered as he drove down the street. Minutes later, he crashed through the clinic doors. "Came across this little fella out in the woods. He's cold and hardly breathing. Please help him." The vet tech's eyes widened. "Come with me." Jake went in after them to the back room. The team sprang swiftly into action, checking vitals, wrapping the creature in heating blankets, and starting fluids. After a tense few minutes, the attending veterinarian doctor, Emily Harper, approached Jake. "He's stable for now, but that may not be a dog." Jake blinked. "What do you mean? It's a puppy, right?" Dr. Harper hesitated. "No dog breed I know of matches its physical characteristics. We need to run some tests." Jake peered through the window at the little creature. A part of him still thought it was only a lost puppy. But in his core, he felt something much stranger was happening. And this was just the start. Little details sometimes hold the biggest secrets. And when you start to ask questions, you need to be prepared for the answers. The clinic was silent, broken only by the gentle beeping of medical devices. Jake sat in the waiting room, drumming his foot. His gaze was fixed on the door to the examination room, where the mysterious creature was receiving treatment. Dr. Emily Harper returned to the stage carrying a clipboard, her expression deeply furrowed. Jake stood up immediately. "How is he?" Dr. Harper nodded reassuringly. "Stable, for now. We were able to warm him up and hydrate him, but that doesn't add up to some other stuff." Jake's stomach tightened. "Like what?" Dr. Harper hesitated. "First off, he has an unusual bone structure. His limbs are longer than an ordinary puppy's, and his fur has a strange texture, almost coarse. His teeth are more like a dog's either. And there's something else." She turned to the clipboard to reveal a close-up photo to Jake. "Look at this. There is a small, barely discernible mark on his shoulder. It looks like a symbol." Jake leaned in, squinting. A dim, round stain of bizarre, elaborate lines. "A birthmark?" Dr. Harper shook her head. "Number it looks intentional, like it was put there." A shiver went down Jake's spine. "What are you saying?" Dr. Harper sighed. I mean, I'm saying this might not be a regular animal, and if that marks what I think it is, maybe someone's looking for him. That evening, Jake found it hard to shake the feeling of unease. He sat outside the clinic in his truck, weighing whether to call it a day or linger nearby. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You have what is not yours. Return it." Jake's blood ran cold. No name, no details. A few moments later, headlights were visible in the rearview mirror. A black SUV pulling across the lot. The driver didn't get out. Jake's gut told him to get out of there. He cranked the engine, but stopped. Was that related to the creature? The SUV slowly drove off into the night before he had a chance to react. Jake exhaled shakily. He knew this wasn't over. Jake couldn't sleep, so he spent hours on the internet, looking up exotic animals, missing exotic dogs, even cryptids. But nothing compared to what he had discovered. Then a news story caught his attention. Increase in unidentified animal sightings in nearby forests. One creature found with mysterious symbol. Jake leaned closer. The piece detailed various locals seeing strange animals in the woods. One witness had even mentioned a creature with fuzzy markings. Jake's breath quickened. And this wasn't just a one-off event. The symbol, the same one Dr. Harper had shown him before, was mentioned again. Jake sat back in his chair, the hard facts finally dawning on him. This wasn't merely a matter of saving a lost puppy. Something much larger was emerging right before our eyes. And Jake was at the center of it all. The more you dig for answers, the closer you get to the truth. But the truth can be far more dangerous than the unknown. Jake barely slept that night. Questions raced through his mind. Who had delivered that ominous message? Why was someone watching him? And, most of all, what had he rescued? At dawn, Jake returned to the Cedar Grove Emergency Animal Clinic. Dr. Harper welcomed him with a strained smile. "Jake, you need to see this." She took him to the examination room where the creature, still sleeping, lay under a warming blanket. But something was different. The creature's fur appeared sleeker, even glinting subtly in the light. Its limbs now seemed more balanced, no longer so gangly. Jake frowned. "Is it changing?" Dr. Harper nodded slowly. "That's what I'm afraid of. Romnus, overnight, stabilized in ways I can't explain. And there's more." She gave Jake a printed sheet. All it was, a scan of the creature's blood work. It has some anomalies in its DNA. One part of its structure is similar to that of canine species, but there are sequences that we've never seen before. It's like it's not in any classification. Jake looked at the report, dread creeping up on him. Dr. Harper hesitated. "Jake, I believe this thing was made, not born." Jake walked out of the clinic with a whirling mind. This thought would not leave him. Who made this creature if it was made? But on his drive home, his thoughts were suddenly overridden by the realization. That strange SUV that had been following him last night. This wasn't coincidence. Someone else knew about the creature, and they wanted it back. Jake tried to backtrack. He went back to the very place he discovered the creature. It was quiet in the woods, but something was wrong. Crackling sticks crunched under his follow-foot as he cautiously stepped between thick trees. It took Jake an hour to find what he hadn't noticed. The rusted metal door built into the ground and half covered by fallen leaves and overgrown moss. A bunker? Jake kneeled and dusted off the debris, uncovering a faded symbol on the door. His heart nearly stopped. It was the same symbol that had been etched onto the creature's shoulder. He was flooded with adrenaline. Yanking on the handle, the door groaned open, revealing a dark staircase leading below ground. Jake paused, looking back at the forest. Then he slowly slipped down into the shadows. With every step, the air became colder. Once again, strobing emergency lights held the long hallway to ransom. He walked past empty rooms, some with broken machines, some with empty cages. But one room stood out. Its door stood slightly open, with documents and photos filling the walls inside. Jake moved in closer, studying the images. Pictures of misfit creatures, unfinished, deformed. Scrawled notes featuring phrases like Phase 2 and Subject 17. Jake's stomach turned. They were making something, experimenting, and it was one of them he had discovered. Footsteps suddenly sounded behind him. Jake spun around. Two figures in dark uniforms, cut-out shadows at the end of the hall, were half-lit by sputtering bulbs. Their faces, covered by masks, were hidden. One of them spoke. "You shouldn't be here." Jake's pulse quickened. Without thinking, he dashed back toward the stairs. The agents called after him, but he did not stop. Jake burst through the bunker door and sprinted through the trees, breath ragged, adrenaline pounding. He didn't look back as he approached his truck, screeching tires as he took off. But Jake, that he wasn't going to outrun the truth. Someone had been making these things, and now they knew he was a part of it. The deeper you go, the more treacherous the dark. And some doors can never be closed again once they're opened. Jake had kept his hands tightly gripping the steering wheel as he tore away from the hidden bunker. Panic gripped his throat as the memories flooded back, the sterile walls of the facility, the figures in masks. Whoever they were, they now knew he had discovered their secret, and that meant he was a target. Jake approached the town and forced himself to slow as he attempted to seem normal. He couldn't afford to attract attention. He parked a few blocks from his apartment, took a deep breath inside the car, and stepped out, scanning the area around him. Everything seemed quiet. Too quiet. Dark clouds hovered above, reflecting the burden on his heart. Jake walked into his apartment and locked the door behind him. He had leaned against the door frame and breathed hard. But the uncomfortable quiet did not last for long. There was a light tap-tap in his living room. Jake's eyes narrowed. He moved forward slowly, taking each step with care. The sound was coming from outside the window. He groaned and pulled back the curtain carefully. There was a little envelope taped to the glass on the outside. Jake's pulse quickened. He just hit the window lock and then snatched the envelope. There was just one sheet of paper inside. "Stop looking. Reunite what belongs to you." Jake's hand clenched around the note. There was no signature, no hint of who had sent it, but the message was unmistakable, and it reaffirmed his deepest fears. They were watching him. Jake knew he would never be able to return to the authorities, not without evidence, and not when he couldn't trust who might already have been involved. He wanted answers, and he wanted them quickly. His thoughts had returned to the jagged mark upon the creature's shoulder. It was the same as the one on the door of the bunker. Maybe if he could learn what it meant, he could figure out who was behind all this. Jake picked up his laptop and started Googling. He spent hours searching through online databases, forums, and hidden websites. Normal searches yielded nothing, but after looking into obscure research archives, he found something. A tattered research paper titled Genetic Hybridization and the Formation of Adaptable Species. The document referred to a private organization known only as the Meridian Project. Jake leaned closer. The paper reported on experiments in gene splicing, merging the DNA of disparate species to develop new adaptive life forms. Much of it sounded like science fiction, but the stamp at the top of the document was clear. It was the same symbol that was on the creature. Jake rested in the back of his chair, catching his breath. They were creating hybrids, and the creature he had then rescued. It was not a mistake. It was an experiment. Jake was jolted back to his surroundings by a loud noise. His phone vibrated on the table. A new text from an unknown number. "You're running out of time. You are closer than you think." Jake's blood ran cold. He automatically went to the window and looked out into the dark street below. At the corner stood a black car idling, the same model as the SUV from before. They had found him. Jake knew he could no longer stay where he was. He hastily filled a bag, food, water, a flashlight, and the documents he had compiled. Gently, he took the dainty creature, now still but still fragile, and tucked him in tightly in a blanket. Jake stopped and looked around his apartment for a moment. "This could be the last time I come here," he thought. He hurried out a back way, creeping through the shadows. He flinched at every noise, and every passing car felt threatening. Jake had no idea where he was headed. But one thing he knew, he says, was for sure. If he wanted answers and to stay alive, he had to stay steps ahead of whoever was hunting him. Running at least is just one part. When you're escaping for your life, you must know what you're running from. Jake ran through the shadowy back streets of the town. The cold night air pricked his skin as he drove down the road, but adrenaline kept him warm. The little creature shifted in his arms and made a weak, almost human sound. Jake gripped tighter, saying quietly, "Just hang in there, little brother. We are going to work this out." Going home was out of the question, and the police were out of the question. Whoever had been behind this had power, resources, and now they were closing in. Jake needed a place to regroup, somewhere off the grid. He thought of a long abandoned cabin in the woods owned by his late uncle. It had become overgrown and had been deserted for years, but it was out in the middle of nowhere. If Jake could get there, he might buy himself some time. Jake drove through the back roads, avoiding the main streets. He didn't see the black SUV, but he couldn't let his guard down. Every headlight appearing from the distance made his heart pound. Several hours of driving, with each mile blasted from Jake's brain and nerve endings. Jake pulled off the road into a dirt trail, hardly visible through an outside shoe. The narrow road twisted through thick trees, branches scratching at the truck's sides. The cabin at last materialized out of the darkness, ragged and overgrown but nevertheless upright. Jake pulled in behind the cabin, out of sight of the road, and parked the truck. He helped the creature inside and placed it on an old, dusty sofa. It smelt of damp wood and long-forgotten memories, but it was shelter. Jake started a fire, and the light glowed throughout the room. He knelt on the floor, eyes fixed on the creature. Its breathing was steady now, but Jake still felt he sensed something unnatural. "What are you?" he murmured. Sleep was impossible. Now he was rifling through his cabin, looking for anything that could be of use. In a dusty corner, he discovered a tarnished box filled with his uncle's belongings, maps, notebooks, and faded photographs. One photo caught his eye. The uncle beside a half-dozen men in lab coats. Behind them, a building with the same symbol Jake had seen on the creature. Jake's hands trembled. His uncle was involved. He began to dig deeper and came across a worn notebook. As Jake flipped through the pages, he found sketches of animals, genetic diagrams, and sometimes cryptic notes. One entry stood out. Phase 2 begins soon. The hybrids are evolving at an accelerated rate. At all costs, they must keep the project hidden. If it gets out, it could change everything. Jake settled back, his mind whirling. The Meridian Project. His family had ties to it. But why? And why had this creature been out in the woods, abandoned to die? A noise like an imploding snare drum jolted Jake into the present. The thing on the couch moved abruptly and made a sharp, almost growling noise. Jake rushed over. Its body shook, though not from the cold. Its limbs quivered in an unsettling manner, and its fur sparkled by the light of the fire, changing colors like oil slick on water. Instinctively, Jake scrambled back and panic set in. Then, it stopped. Its form seemed to stabilize, and its breathing slowed. But it didn't look the same. Its features had subtly shifted, limbs more even in proportion, eyes sharper, and its fur silkier. It looked stronger. Jake cautiously approached. "What's happening to you?" The creature fluttered its eyes, and for the first time locked eyes with Jake. There was intelligence in those eyes, awareness. Jake felt a chill. This wasn't just survival. This was evolution. And whatever was going on, it was far from done. Every answer raises further questions, and at some point, the further you go, the harder it is to come back. The snapping fire threw dancing shadows on the walls of the cabin. The creature that was at once familiar and alien Jake stared at now, the dim light playing around it. Its shape had morphed slightly, but it wasn't the shift in its appearance that put him on edge. It was the intelligence behind its eyes. It was watching him, not with fear, but with calm understanding. Jake cautiously leaned in closer. "Can you understand me?" The beast didn't move, but its gaze stayed fixed on him. Jake took a breath in, letting it out very slowly, unsure if he was speaking to the creature or himself. A soft, rustling sound suddenly broke through from outside. Jake's body tensed. Without thinking, he grabbed the ancient hunting rifle that hung over the fireplace, a remnant of his uncle. He crept to the window and looked out into the dark woods. Shadows sprawled between the trees, but nothing moved. Then another sound. Closer this time. A single branch snapped. Jake recoiled from the window, heart racing. He looked to the creature, which now appeared alert, ears raised to the door. They had found him. Not wasting a second, Jake extinguished the flame, swallowing the room in darkness. He snatched up the rifle and checked it, though he had no idea if it would even be effective against whoever or whatever was outside. The wind howled outside, and the cabin creaked. Jake stood against the wall next to the door, holding his breath. Then, a soft knock. Jake's pulse quickened. It wasn't a booming, threatening knock, just a single, deliberate tap. He stayed still. Then came the voice, barely above a whisper. "Jake, we need to talk." Jake froze. Whoever it was knew his name. The voice spoke again, measured and even. "I'm not here to hurt you. But if you never open this door, they will find you first, and they won't be as polite." Jake held the rifle tighter. "Who are you?" A pause. Then, "Someone like you once, before I knew the truth. Open the door. We're running out of time." Jake paused, his thoughts in an uproar. He looked back at the creature, who was unsettlingly still, as if waiting to see what he would do. Jake slowly unlocked the door, leaving the chain fastened. He opened it just a crack. The woman on the porch wore a hood pulled low over her head, obscuring her features. She put her hands up in a gesture of peace. "My name is Claire. I can explain everything, but we have to move, now." Jake admitted her with great resignation, keeping the rifle close. Claire wore a cautious pace, yet a hasty step, looking around the cabin. She pointed to the creature. "It survived. That's unexpected." Jake's eyes narrowed. "You know what this is?" Claire nodded. "It's part of Project Meridian, a failed experiment. They were never supposed to escape, but it did, and now they want it back." Jake tightened his grip on the rifle. "Who are they?" Claire took a deep breath. "A private organization, supported by people who believe they can control life itself. They breed hybrids, including that one, for reasons they won't confess. Weapons, experiments, but when things are not working, they scrub it clean. No questions, no survivors." Jake felt a chill. "Why help me?" Claire met his gaze. "Because I worked for them in the past, and that reminds me how far they will go. But this one is different. Once they have it back, they're going to begin, and it won't end with a single creature." They were interrupted by a distant hum. Claire's face hardened. "They're here. We have to go." Jake stroked the creature's head back to Claire. The choice was clear. What this was, it was bigger than him, bigger than any of them. And running was no longer sufficient. What happens when the walls close in is sometimes the only way out is through. The distant hum intensified, reverberating through the floorboards of the cabin. Claire's eyes sharpened, her tone low but fierce. "They're scanning the area. Once they get their bearings on this place, there won't be a knock. They'll burn it down." Jake's mind raced. He looked at the beast. It was awake now, looking at both of them with unnerving perception. He didn't know if he could trust Claire either, but he couldn't stay here anymore. "We can't go the main road," Claire said, heading for the back door. "They'll have it covered. There's a service trail on the backside of the cabin. It arrives at an old ranger station. If we could make it there, maybe we lose them." Jake paused for a beat, then nodded. He snatched up the creature, bundled it cautiously in a thick blanket, and threw his old hunting rifle over his shoulder. Claire opened the door a crack, peering into the dark woods. "Move quietly and stay close." Into the night they slipped, cold air stinging their skin. The woods were unnaturally quiet, each flap of a leaf quickening Jake's pulse. Farther off, thin beams of light sliced through the trees, search teams. Claire took the lead, busting through the thick underbrush like a pro. Jake trailed behind, trying to be quiet. But the thing in his arms stirred, emitted a soft, high-pitched whimper. Claire stopped in her tracks. "Quiet him, now!" "It's all right, buddy," Jake whispering gently. "We're going to be all right. Just stay quiet." But it was too late. A concentrated beam of light sliced through the darkness, fixating on them. "There!" Voices shouted behind them, and the unmistakable thunder of boots smashing through the undergrowth. "Run!" Claire sprang forward, and Jake followed without question. Gunfire pierced the silence, bullets whipping through tree branches. They weaved through the woods, hearts racing. The trail continued toward a steep incline, narrowing as they walked. Claire kept moving. She jumped over the edge and slid down the muddy incline. Jake trailed behind, holding the creature close against his chest. They fell into a shallow ravine. Claire sprang up and pulled Jake to his feet. "Come on! The station is just ahead." They tripped through the dark until the outline of the old ranger station appeared. The small wooden structure appeared abandoned, but Claire did not hesitate and kicked the door open. Inside, dust and cobwebs clung to the walls. Claire then shoved a heavy cabinet in front of the door. "This isn't going to keep them long. We need to think." Jake gasped, frozen in disbelief at the creature. It stared back at him with disconcerting composure. What do they want with him? Claire dabbed sweat off her brow. Control. Power. These hybrids were engineered to adapt to be more than any living thing. They could not control this one, and now it is a threat to them. Jake's voice was firm. Then we ensure they can never get him back. A low hum returned to the air, but this time from directly overhead. Through a gap in the boarded window, Jake saw the dark shadow of a drone over them. Claire's eyes widened. They're locking in. We need to move, now. Jake gripped tighter on the creature. There was no going back now. When you're cornered, fight isn't always the K1 visceral option, but sometimes it's the only one. The mechanical hum of the drone intensified as it circled above the derelict ranger station. Jake could feel it vibrating through the wooden floorboards. Claire glanced through a gap in the boarded window, her face covering in shadow. "They've surrounded us," she said in a whisper. "If we remain here, we are dead." Jake gulped, loosening his already tight grasp on the creature, now strangely serene in his hug. "So, what's the plan?" Claire quickly goes to a dusty corner of the station and pulls back a loose floorboard. Beneath it was a metal hatch. "This goes into an old maintenance tunnel. It's tenuous, but it may gain us some time." Jake hesitated and looked at the fragile creature. "Is it safe?" Claire smirked grimly. "Safer than here. Let's move." She opened the hatch, and a cold gust of air rushed from the darkness below. With that, Claire walked off into the shadows. Jake ran behind, clutching the creature to his chest. The tunnel was narrow and wet, the air heavy with dust and mildew. Despite the darkness, Claire forged ahead, moving quickly. Jake trailed behind her, relying on the dim glow of Claire's flashlight to lead him. Above, muffled voices drifted down, and the papery crunch of boots. "They're in the station," Claire said under her breath. "We need to move faster." The tunnel spiraled downwards, further underground. Jake's mind raced. How deep does this go? Then, suddenly, light. They stepped into a large, open chamber. An old storage room filled with rusting equipment and broken crates. Claire scanned the room. "We have the ability to seal the tunnel behind us. It might slow them down." Jake assisted Claire in dragging a heavy metal cabinet across the entrance of the tunnel, closing it up. But the momentary ease was fleeting. An explosion rumbled, jolting the ground. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. Jake's eyes widened. "They blew the entrance. They're forcing us out." Claire muttered, cursing under her breath. "They're not going to let us leave without a fight." Jake's eyes skimmed the walls in the storage room until something caught his eye. A faded map nailed to the wall and slightly yellowing, but legible. "Look," Jake pointed. "There's a maintenance shaft that goes up to the surface a couple of miles east." Claire looked at the map, nodding. "It's risky. The shaft might be collapsed, but it's our only shot." Without wasting a second, they rushed off down the darkened corridor leading to the shaft. The air turned chill, the walls constricted. Finally, they reached it. A rusty metal ladder led up, but was still in place. Claire tested it carefully. "It'll hold. Go, I'll cover you." Jake hesitated. "No, we go together. If they catch one of us..." Claire cut him off. "Move, Jake!" Jake scaled, holding the creature tight. With every creak of the ladder, his stomach lurched. Claire was right behind him. Up top, Jake opened the rusted hatch. A blast of cool, fresh air struck his face. They were outside, but the relief was fleeting. The woods surrounding them weren't desolate. There were moving shadows among the trees. Claire appeared behind him and pulled the hatch closed. "Run! Now!" They ran through the woods, zigzagging between trees. The thing in Jake's arms stirred again, emitting a soft but sharp sound, almost a warning. Claire eased, dragging Jake behind a tree. Wait, listen. Jake strained to hear. It was uncomfortably quiet in the forest. Then came the rumble of heavy machinery in the distance. Claire's face paled. They got to bring in the extraction unit. If they corner us, we're finished. Jake's grip tightened. Then we can't stop. We have to keep moving. Claire nodded grimly. There's an old ranger lookout a few miles from here. High ground. If we make it, we can signal for help. Jake didn't ask who would come to their aid. Right now, it didn't matter. They ran, and the forest behind them started to close in. Sometimes, the least accessible place is the safest place to be. Jake and Claire sprinted through the thick underbrush of the wooded forest, the chilled air searing into their lungs. And every rustling leaf, every click of a twig cracking from afar, sent a jolt of adrenaline through Jake. The creature in his arms twitched but went quiet, sensing the urgency of their escape. Claire took point, picking her way through the trees with practiced deftness. Her voice was scarcely above a whisper. The old lookout tower isn't too far. When we get there, we can take a breather and see what comes next. Jake nodded, testing the idea, though doubt ate away at him. Would they even get a moment to catch their breath? But the roar of engines rumbled in the distance behind. The extraction unit was getting close, and time was short. For what seemed like hours, they broke through the trees and emerged into a small clearing. And there, silhouetted on the darkening sky, stood the Ranger Lookout Tower. Tall, weathered, but still standing. Claire didn't hesitate. Up the stairs, quick! Jake followed, the wooden steps creaking beneath them. As they climbed higher, he felt increasingly vulnerable, exposed to the open air. But when they made it to the summit, the view opened out across the whole forest below. Jake held the creature carefully as he laid it down. It blinked, slowly, as if recharging its power. Claire peered toward the horizon through an old pair of binoculars. We have a little time. They are still drying the lower trails, but they'll eventually discover this place. Jake was hunched over the railing, taking a breath. We can't run away forever. What now? Claire put down the binoculars. We need to send a signal. In the corner, there is an old radio. If it still operates, we can call for external help. Perhaps somebody still watches them. Jake approached the dusty equipment, turning dials and flicking switches. Static filled the air. Come on, come on! A distant voice broke through the static. If anyone is out there, you're in danger. It's Project Meridian. It has to be stopped. Jake's eyes widened. He adjusted the dial. Hello? Can you hear me? This is Jake Thompson. We need help. They're hunting us. Static. Then the voice came back, more clearly this time. Jake, they know. They're already on their way. Get out, now! The radio went dead. Jake looked at Claire, panic swelling. They know we're here. Claire picked up the rifle and checked the ammunition. Then we make our stand. A few moments later, headlights sliced through the trees. Silhouettes slunk in the dark, staccato and surgical. Claire crouched by the window. They are surrounding the tower. We can't keep them off for long. Jake gripped the rifle even tighter. Then we buy ourselves as much time as we can. But suddenly, a loud screech sang into nothingness. Jake glanced over to see the animal on all fours, its eyes dimly glowing. Its body started to change, muscles tensing, limbs stretching. Claire's breath caught. It's adapting, preparing to fight. Jake stared in disbelief. It's protecting us. The first bang came and the window shattered. The echo of gunfire was mingling with the chaos below as Claire fired back. And the creature jumped into the darkness, prepared to confront whatever that waited below. In the face of overwhelming odds, survival is a willful act. But sometimes it's the most unlikely allies that fight the hardest. Gunshots and bullets ripped through the cold night air as they echoed through the trees. Jake instinctively ducked as shards of glass erupted around him. Claire knelt next to the window, calmly reloading her weapon. Outside, blurs of shadow darted in, closing in from every angle. Jake tightened his grip on the rifle. He was breathing hard, staccato gasps. "How many are there?" Claire glanced through the broken window. "Too many. And more are coming. They want the creature alive. Us? Not so much." Jake glanced at the creature. It was no longer cowering, its muscles taut, its eyes fixed on the forest below. A low, guttural growl emanated from it, a sound that chilled Jake to the bone. "It's prepared to battle," Claire mumbled. Jake swallowed hard. "We can't just sit here, we have to do something." Claire nodded. "They're a good team. We've got to break up their formation, draw them out. If we can shatter their line, perhaps." "What do you want?" Jake asked, some more dumbfounded, before the beast leapt from the tower in one feathery swoop. Jake ran to the window, heartbeat galloping. "No!" Claire grabbed his shoulder. "It knows what it's doing, and right now, it may be our last chance." Screams echoed out from the woods as the beast ripped through the assailants. Gunfire became intermittent, filled by terrified shouts of men taken by surprise. Claire seized the moment. "Now! We make our move when they're distracted." Jake rode her tail down the splintering wood steps, each slat a competition against the carnage below. The cold air slapped them as they exploded from the tower. In the trees, smoke and shadows intermingled. He made arrangements for a creature that would sense the darkness, strike like a phantom, quick and lethal. Claire led Jake through the trees, dodging the chaos. "We need to reach the river. It's the one place they don't track us easy." Jake nodded, struggling to catch his breath. "What about the creature? We can't leave it." Claire's eyes were hard. "It can handle itself. If we don't get out, none of this will matter." Gunfire cracked nearby. A bullet whizzed by Jake's ear and stuck into a tree. He stumbled but kept running. They emerged from the timberline and the sound of rushing water greeted them in the distance. There. Claire gestured toward the narrow river, its frozen water glimmering in the moonlight. Without hesitating, they plunged into the frigid current, fire in their bones, ice in their lungs. The water retarded them, but it also hid their movements. In the woods behind them, gunfire and screams were echoing. Jake turned back once, catching a glimpse of the creature, bloodied but unbowed, before the trees devoured it. Claire grabbed his arm. "Don't look back. Keep moving." Hours later, soaked and weary, they stumbled into a narrow cave concealed behind a waterfall. Safe, for now. Jake slumped against the cold stone wall and shivered. Claire huddled close to the entrance, listening for any signs of pursuit. Jake spoke so soft it was barely a whisper. "We left it behind." Claire didn't turn. "If it survived, it will find us. If it didn't, then we have to complete what it begun." A silence hung between them, broken only by the distant roar of the waterfall. Jake shut his eyes, aware that this war was only just beginning. And somewhere in the darkness, the creature was still fighting. Silence can often be the loudest warning, and peace is only the eye of the storm. Cold walls of the cave pressed in around them, giving a precarious semblance of safety. The roar of the waterfall drowning all sound from outside, but leaving the pounding of Jake's heartbeat in his ears. He rested his back against the cold, moist stone and stared at the flickering flame of a makeshift torch. Claire was sitting closer to the front, her gaze flickering to the shadows. Neither spoke for a moment. The fog of fatigue and doubt weighed in the atmosphere. It was Jake, who finally broke the silence. "Do you think it made it?" Claire didn't reply right away. She tightened her grip on the rifle. "If it did, it'll find us. If it didn't, we need to prepare." Jake rested his head against the wall and closed his eyes. The creature had put its life on the line for them. Could they do the same? But sleep wouldn't come. Not yet. The hours passed slowly. Jake relapsed into a doze, fidgeting between sleep and half awake. Then, in the silence, a soft sound floated through the air from behind the waterfall. Claire sprang to her feet, weapon in hand. Jake sat up, heart pounding. Then, a familiar low growl. Jake approached the entrance, warily glancing through the curtain of water. Emerging slowly from the shadows was the creature, limping, bloodied but alive. Jake's breath seized in his throat. "It's here! It survived!" Claire lowered her weapon, an inscrutable expression on her face. "Tough little thing." Jake pressed on, assisting the creature toward the cave slowly. It crumpled next to him, gasping. Its eyes, pained as they were, still gleamed with resolve. "It's okay," Jake whispered. "You're safe now. We'll figure this out, I promise." Claire crouched beside them. "We can't stay here. They're going to scour every inch of this forest. We need to move before dawn." Jake nodded, but his limbs felt like wet rags. "But where? They're everywhere." Claire's gaze hardened. "Then we stop running. We go to them." Jake frowned. "What are you talking about?" Claire fished a tattered map from the inside of her jacket. She unrolled it, indicating a marked location deep in the mountains. "This is one of their primary bases, hidden, but not impervious. If we can get in, we can pull down the whole thing, destroy it, end this." Jake looked down at the map, fear and resolve mingling in his chest. "That's suicide." Claire met his eyes. "So is running. They'll never stop. Not until we make them." Jake looked down at the creature, its breathing slow and steady. He tightened his fists. "Then let's finish this." They were on the run again by first light. There was forest as far as the eye could see, but Claire brought them true north. It was a long way to the site itself, and it was hard going, rough ground, bitter winds, and all sorts of unknowns out there in the dark. He took the creature tenderly, but fire swelled in him with each step forward. He was done running, and up front, enfolded in the mountains, the mass of Project Meridian awaited, ready for them. Sometimes, in order to kill the monster, you have to go directly into its lair. The freezing winds of the mountains cut at their flesh as Jake, Claire, and the creature marched on. The snow crunched under their boots, and the howling wind threatened to cover up everything. But Claire pressed on, each step bringing them closer to the core of Project Meridian. The scarf adjusted around his neck. He cradled the creature gently. It was stronger now, but each breath it took felt heavy. How much farther? Claire didn't slow her pace. Not far. Their facility is embedded into the mountainside, hidden, but not unreachable. Jake gazed up ahead, the towering cliffs creating long shadows onto the snow. "And once we get in," Claire's eyes hardened, "we destroy everything. No more running, no more hiding. We end this." Hours later, they began to approach a ridge with a view over an apparently empty expanse of snow. Claire dropped to one knee, pulling aside a fresh dusting to reveal cold steel below. A giant, camouflaged door embedded into the mountain. Jake's breath caught. How'd we open it? Claire produced a small device from her coat, a stolen keycard from her time spent within the folds of Meridian. She slipped it into a hidden panel, and with a deep mechanical groan, the door opened slowly. The interior was a far cry from the frigid outside. Harsh, fluorescent lights flickered against sterile metal walls. The air reeked of cold metal and chemicals. Claire led the way. "Stay close. They won't expect someone coming through the front, but that won't last." Jake followed, each footfall clicking ominously. The creature kept close, its eyes flitting about the cold corridors. Inside the facility, alarms blared all of a sudden. "Intruder alert! Sector 4. Claire cursed. "They know. We move fast." They ran down a tangle of hallways, past empty labs and dark observation rooms. Jake looked at the glass tanks that filled the walls, some broken, others still containing things he couldn't make sense of. What were they doing here? Jake whispered. Claire's face darkened, creating monsters, and they called it science. In front, guards armed to the teeth had barred their way. Claire drew her weapon without hesitation. Gunfire erupted. Jake ducked behind cover, his heart racing. Claire moved with lethal efficiency, dispatching one guard after another. The thing lunged, galloping at a deadly speed, throwing weapons and intersection of pain at whomever was in its path. But it wasn't enough. More guards streamed in, trapping their escape. A slow, deliberate clap rang out behind them in the corridor. A man in a crisp suit stepped closer, easy, confident. Dr. Marcus Hale. "Claire, I never should have suspected you'd come crawling back. And you brought guests. How quaint." Claire pointed her gun at him. "It's over, Marcus. This ends now." Dr. Hale smirked. "Oh, Claire, it's only just beginning." He waved, and additional soldiers advanced, weapons also raised. Claire gripped her rifle harder. Jake's breath quickened. The beast growled, its shape shifting just so, poised to pounce. Dr. Hale raised an eyebrow. "You actually think you're going to stop us? We're on to the next phase already. And you're too late." I looked up at Claire, fear and defiance raging inside me. "What now?" Dr. Hale never lost Claire's eyes. "We fight. We destroy everything, and none of this happens again." Jake nodded slowly. "Then let's finish this. When it's all or nothing, the decision isn't hard. You either fight for your life or succumb to the night." The ice, clean air of the Meridian facility pressed in around Jake, Claire, and the creature. Before them stood Dr. Marcus Hale, guards flanking him on either side, his smug smile unfaded. Claire never lowered her weapon. "This ends now, Hale. We're shutting this down." Dr. Hale laughed, the sound chilling and empty. "Claire, very sentimental as usual, you always were. You think you can walk in here and unpick years of work. This is evolution. The world will adjust or die." Jake gripped the rifle tighter. "Not if we can help it." Dr. Hale's smirk faded. He gestured to the guards. "Kill them, but return the creature alive. It's too valuable to lose." The hall erupted in gunfire. Claire ducked behind cover, fighting back with deadly accuracy. Jake did the same, adrenaline coursing through his blood. It growled, a deep black rumble that echoed in the hollow back of its throat before it lunged forward, moving with the terrifying speed of a predator and shredding through the guards like loose paper with primal ferocity. But there were too many. Claire ducked behind a console. "Round 1. We cannot beat this fight head-on. We need to destroy the core. It's in the lower levels." Jake looked at the elevator panel next to them. "Then let's end this." Claire beat on the control panel, prying the elevator doors apart. They huddled into one, Jake hitting the button for the ground floor. Dr. Hale's voice echoed after the doors closed. "You can't stop what's already started," as the elevator hummed lower into the mountain. Jake gripped the rifle with trembling hands. Claire checked her weapon. And then there's the core, which controls it all. The labs and the complex security systems as well as the experiments. We blow it up, and this place blows with it. Jake nodded. And Hale? Claire's eyes hardened. He burns with it. The doors opened with a hiss. The core chamber, giant, a sprawl of glowing machinery and humming energy. Tall glass tanks lined the walls, each containing dark, writhing shapes. Jake's stomach turned. What are those? Claire's voice was grim. Phase 2. They were going to let them out. We can't let that happen. The creature growled subtly, inching closer to Jake as if it too could smell the danger surrounding them. Claire found the control panel. Cover me. I'll overload the system. Jake stationed and watched the darkness. But soon, alarms were ringing. Warning, system overload initiated. That's exactly what I need, Doctor, Hale said through the intercom. You fools. Do you see the trouble you've caused? Claire smirked. Yeah, we ended you. Doors flew open, guards flooded in, weapons drawn. Jake shot, the creature jumping up beside him. Sparks arced off the systems as they failed, and Claire worked furiously at the console. Almost there, Claire shouted. Jake clenched his teeth, holding on to the line. Then, the power core started to glow violently, alarms wailing. Claire turned to them. It's done. We need to move. Now! The walls trembled as explosions pummeled the facility. Jake, Claire, and the creature raced through the crumbling corridors. Fires erupted, glass shattered, metal groaned under the strain. They came to a maintenance shaft, their only way out. Claire pried it open. Go! Jake assisted the creature climb through and followed right after. Last was Claire, slamming the hatch behind them. They burst out onto the snowy mountainside and gasped. The mountain rumbled behind them. Flames and debris billowed into the air when the Meridian facility imploded, engulfed by its own making. Silence followed. Jake dropped to the snow, watching the devastation. Claire stayed at his side, her gaze fixed on the smoldering crater. Jake finally spoke. It's over. Claire nodded slowly. For now, but people like Hale will always exist. We have to be ready. Jake gazed at the creature as it lay calm beside them. And so will it. The wind screamed around them, but for this moment they were free. Months later, the woods had started to recover. Jake at the edge of the woods, the creature at his side, stronger, more at home. And then Claire came up and handed Jake a folded piece of paper. Rumors are speaking of additional facilities, smaller, but still active. Jake huffed, a bit of a smile creeping on his lips. Then, well, I guess our work remains somehow unfinished. Claire smirked. Number. But now we know how to fight. The beast emitted a low growl, not out of anger, but of determination. They turned together towards the unknown and walked forward. The end